Hello viewers, welcome to Study with Master Notes again. Hope all you are fine. So I am also fine. So I have discussed already comparative literature of MEC 15. Some students asked me, please ma'am cover all chapters for your reference. I am telling that it's not possible for me to cover all chapters at once. So we will progress chapter one by one, and if you regularly watch my videos, then you will get all the videos of comparative literature of MEC 15. So you will get all clarified doubts of your comparative literature, and please ask me on the comment box so that I will be able to give you the explanation of anything of your doubts. So please keep watching regularly Study with Master Notes, and please motivate me so that I will cover all the chapters. So here it is the unit 1, literature and culture, and it is of your comparative literature. So here it is block 2. You can see I will cover today block 2, literature and culture. Okay, so literature and culture, unit 1, literature and culture, oral and written literature, then Indian literature, historiography and periodization, then readings and interpretation. So we will cover this. So my dear students, let's start. Literature and culture. Here it is the objectives, introduction, culture, the history of the concept, understanding culture as a way of life, understanding culture and human experience, approaches to the study of culture, cultural diversity, the cultural studies approach. Let us sum up unit and questions, references and suggested readings. So here it is the objectives. After reading the unit, the learner will be able to understand the changing meanings and the context of the term culture. So get an overview of the major approaches to the study of culture and understand cultural diversity and change in the context of globalization. Okay, so we will start this. Here it is the objectives, then it is the introduction. This unit discusses the interplay between literature and culture. So what is literature and what is culture? It is interrelated. Okay, so as a student of comparative literature, you are all well versed with literature and culture. It aims to familiarize the learner with the concept of culture, which is a key concept in the area of comparative literature and anthropology. All of you know that anthropology is the study of race or culture, and here it is the key concept in the area of comparative literature and anthropology. It is only through an understanding and appreciation of the complexity of the term that we can fruitfully study and compare literature and work of art across cultures. We will trace the development of the concept of culture and the relevance of the concept in literature, from its association with high art and intellectual pursuit to its broader definition as a way of life of a community. Culture has been a complex and controversial concept. We will also attempt to understand how relationships of power articulate and establish what is culturally approved or disapproved. We hope to sensitize you, the learner, to the fact that the literature is also embedded within structure of power and dominance. So here it is the main key point. You can note down what is literature and what is culture, and you will know that the literature is also embedded within structures of power and dominance. So what do you mean dominance? It's the dominant character. Sometimes you and your friend might have experienced that somebody is dominating you by their power. So that is called dominance. At the same time, they suppress you by their power. That is called dominance. At the same time, it has potential for acting as a harbinger of change and challenging established orthodoxies. So I did my orthodoxies. Orthodoxies means some opposite challenges or some opposites, that is called orthodoxies. So harbinger of change and challenging established orthodoxies. Then culture, the history of the concept. The concept of culture is highly contested one, and the scholars have hotly debated exactly what it means. In the contemporary times, the utility and relevance of the concept has also been questioned. Rapid social change, globalization, hybridization, and transnational transactions have made boundaries between groups and communities increasingly porous and permeable. What do you mean by porous or permeable? Means some groups or some cultures can accommodate other groups or cultures. That is called porous or permeable. Porous means you are very well known. That porous means some holes. Okay, so like this, some literature and some culture also, that is porous and permeable, they are interchangeable due to globalization and hybridization. The well-known British scholar Raymond William writes that culture is one of the 2 or 3 most complex words in the English language, not just an account of its complicated and historical development, but also because it has become a key concept in several intellectual disciplines and in several distinct and sometimes incompatible systems of thought. So what British scholar Raymond Williams wrote about culture? The well-known British scholar Raymond Williams writes that culture is one of the 2 or 3 most complex words in English language, not just on account of its complicated historical development, but also because it has become a key concept in several intellectual disciplines and in several distinct and sometimes incompatible systems of thought. Okay, because of its complicated historical development, but also because it has become a key concept in several intellectual disciplines and several distinct and sometimes incompatible systems of thought. So here is a culture Raymond William writes, English language not just account of its complicated historical development, but also because it has become a key concept in several intellectual disciplines and several distinct and sometimes incompatible systems of thought. So here it is the main key point, you can note down. Raymond Williams writes about culture. It is a several intellectual disciplines and several distinct incompatible systems of thought. Its Latin root is colere, which variously means to inhabit, cultivate, protect, honor, with, worship. Okay, so how do you define culture? It is the Latin root is colere, which variously means to inhabit, cultivate, protect, honor, with, worship. The Latin word cultura pertain to husbandry or the trending of natural growth. It entered the English language as the word culture. The early usages of culture were as a noun of process, the trending or nature of something, basically crops and animals. From the 16th century up to 18th and 19th century, the usage of the term was extended from the trending of natural growth to the process of human development. William cites examples from Bacon, the culture and manurance of minds. Okay, so William cites examples from Bacon, the culture and manurance of minds 1605, Hobbes a culture of their mind 1651, Johnson she neglected the culture of her understanding 1759. However, it is only in the late 18th century that the word culture came to be used as an independent noun, as abstract process or the product of such a process. Williams point out that by a middle of the 18th century it came to be used as a synonym for civilization. Okay, so Williams point out in the middle of 18th century it came to be used as a synonym for civilization. So here it is, the synonym of civilization is also culture. Who coins it? Williams. Okay, then to be cultured or civilized meant being gentle and well mannered, having the ability to appreciate the finer things of like fine art, music, literature, etc. Even today, the term is frequently used in this sense. A glance at the matrimonial columns in any Indian newspaper will show advertisements seeking a bride or groom from a cultured family. Okay, so you can see every newspaper that is a matrimonial columns. So matrimonial columns ask for a advertisement seeking a bride or groom from a cultured family. Okay, cultured means civilized. The growth of industrialization in the 18th and 19th century in Europe resulted in mechanization and material advancement and the development of abstract rationality. Romantic writers like Wordsworth critiqued these developments and sought a more organic and empathetic relationship between human beings and nature. Material or mechanical development thus came to be tagged with the category of civilization, whereas culture symbolized spiritual, intellectual, and aesthetic development of an individual or community. Meanwhile, the German philosopher Herder introduced a critical idea that further developed the concept, namely that we must speak of cultures rather than culture in the singular, in other words, whole ways of life of particular groups. From this emerged the anthropological understanding of culture as we know it today. Our research of terms like tribal culture, Indian culture, folk culture derives from this understanding. However, as Raymond Williams points out, the 19th century idea of culture as a process of mental and spiritual cultivation gave it a special association with intellectual work and the arts. The term is a kind of shorthand for both the process and product of these activities. Thus, we speak of culture, the general association that comes to mind is that of literary works, paintings, sculpture, music, etc. In other words, the creative or aesthetic dimensions or products of a particular society or community. However, sociologists and anthropologists consider art and literature as just a part of the overall culture of the group. For them, culture has a much broader meaning as the way of life of a community. Make a list of the different words used to capture the concept of culture in the major Indian languages. How are these words used in everyday life? What meaning do they convey? Discuss with your peers at the study center. Here is the activity 1. Then we will go understanding culture as a way of life. As the anthropologist Ralph Linton 1945 explains, culture refers to the total way of life of society and not just those aspects which the society regards as higher or more desirable. Thus, reading Browning or Kalidasa are merely elements of the larger whole or totality of culture. This totality includes mundane activities such as cooking food or driving a car. So thus reading Browning and Kalidasa are merely elements of the larger whole or totality of culture. Okay, the reading Browning and Kalidasa. Okay, then this totality includes mundane activities such as cooking food or driving a car. It may therefore be concluded that for the social scientist there is no such thing as an uncultured person or society. Every society, no matter how small or simple, possesses a culture. All human beings by virtue of belonging to a group are cultured. Definitions of culture are many, yet it argued by some scholars that the concept of culture is the single most difficult term in anthropology. Grover and Clucon 1952 identified 162 different formal definitions. Definitions of culture are many, yet it is argued by some scholars that the concept of culture is the single most difficult term in anthropology. Grover and Clucon 1952 identify 162 different formal definitions. So who gave 162 different formal definitions? Here is the answer is Grover and Clucon. Here is the answer is Grover and Clucon. 1952 identified 162 different formal definitions. There is a general agreement that culture is learned, that it enables humans to adapt themselves to their natural and social settings, that it is greatly variable, that it is manifested in institutions, thought patterns, and material objects and artifacts. Then Herskovits 1955, often it is used as synonymously with society. The distinction made by anthropologists between these seemingly interchangeable terms is as follows. Culture is the way of life of a people, where society is an organized and interacting aggregate of individuals who follow a given way of life. So what is culture and what is society? So culture is the way of life of a people, while society is an organized and interacting aggregate of individuals who follow a given way of life. That is Herskovits definition in 1955. Society implies relationships and groupings, while culture implies ways of acting and living. In the words of Herskovits, a society is composed of people. The way they behave is their culture. So society is also defined by some scholars as a group of people who occupy a particular territory and speak a common language. By this definition, societies may or may not correspond to the contemporary categories of nation states or countries. Many countries, including India, have within their boundaries groups of people speaking different languages which may not be understood by other groups, and therefore may be said to comprise a number of societies with distinct cultures. By the same logic, we may say that some societies may include more than one nation or countries. Bangladesh and West Bengal in India, for example, share a common language. Bangla, Punjabi and Sindhi are spoken on both sides of the Indo-Pak border. Can we speak of Bangla or Punjabi society and culture that cut across national boundaries? Does this come in conflict with the idea of a pan-Indian culture? What about ethnic, religious and other minority cultures which fear that they are being subsumed or swallowed up by the majority? These days, we also hear the term multicultural societies, further complicating the concept. Thus, we see that culture is indeed a very porous and politically loaded concept. Okay, so minority always suppressed by majority. So these days also hear the term multicultural societies, further complicating the concept. One of the most durable and widely used definition of the term was given way back in the year 1871 by the British anthropologist E.B. Taylor. According to Taylor, culture is the complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, custom and any other capabilities acquired by man as a member of society. So according to Taylor, what is the definition of culture? Here you can get the questions of your NET exam also. So according to E.B. Taylor, what do you mean by culture? According to Taylor, culture is the complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, customs and any other capabilities required by man as a member of society. Note that culture includes both material and non-material dimensions. Material culture refers to houses, tools, musical instruments, etc. While non-material culture refers to learned behavior and ideas, including beliefs, values, attitudes, and ideals. There are characteristics of a particular social group. Material and non-material dimensions are intricately interconnected. Attitude and ideals. There are characteristics of a particular social group. Material and non-material dimensions are intricately interconnected. If we take an example of material culture, dimensions like say a hand-woven silk saree, we find that there is an entire system of values underlying its production. The designs of motif handed down through generations, the myths and legends associated with it, the specific system of power relations and hierarchies that mark production and consumption. It may be a valued item in the trousseau of an upper caste or upper class bride, but the weavers who make it are very poor, gender relations and so on. Thus, the production of a material artifact is steeped in complex layers of culture and politics that must be delicately teased out to understand it properly. Let us take another example from contemporary urbanized society. Physical fitness and slimness is regarded as a highly desirable goal. This is directly related to the development of a consumption-driven society where food and food choices are abundant, where technologies for fitness, exercise machines, gyms, special clothing and accessories etc. are available to a large number of people. However, in a society where food is scarce and starvation common, the emphasis on diets and lifestyles would be indeed out of place and inappropriate. While archaeologists and cultural anthropologists lay a good deal of emphasis on the material dimension of culture, historians and scholars of cultural studies emphasize symbolic and signifying systems, thus pay greater heed to the process of production of cultural products rather than the products themselves. The relations between material and symbolic production constitute the central point in any discussion of culture according to Williams, and thus must always be related rather than contrasted. Taylor's definition of culture given above is a hold-all, one in which included every human capability he could think of, which makes it both useful and all-encompassing in one sense and far too general to be of much use in another. The American anthropologist Clifford Greer's works suggests that culture be viewed as shared meanings expressed through public communication. So, what do you mean by Clifford Greer's work suggest? Okay, so what Clifford Greer's work suggest, here it is the main key point you can note down. Clifford Greer's work suggests that culture can be viewed as shared meanings expressed through public communication. While different individuals may not imbibe exactly the same knowledge or develop the same skills, they nonetheless share a common worldview and a common framework of values and meanings. In this sense, culture permeates all human activity. It shapes our understanding of what is valuable, desirable, and undesirable. It regulates our behavior and our interactions. According to the British scholar Stuart Hall, one way of thinking about culture is in the form of shared conceptual maps, shared language systems, and the codes which govern the relationship of translation between them. Culture, as you will have realized from the above discussion, is socially learnt and transmitted and provides the mechanism through which human needs are satisfied. Unlike animals, which rely upon their instincts, humans are fundamentally social and rely upon cultural practices to fulfill their physical needs as well as social needs for security and companionship. Culture prescribes certain norms and standards of behavior which members of society are expected to follow, and each culture has its own distinctive beliefs, practices, and ways of life that are passed down from generation to generation. At the same time, culture is not a static phenomenon and adapts and changes in accordance with changes in the environment. When we examine the history of a society, it becomes obvious that its culture has changed over time. These changes may be stimulated by changes in the external environment as well as the social environment. The colonial expansion of Western societies over the past few centuries has led to dramatic changes in the different parts of the world. In India, the British rule led to changes in systems of land tenure, agriculture, administrative and economic arrangements, education, law, political systems, and name but a few. The introduction of English simultaneously undermined traditional hierarchies and put in place new privileged classes and elites. So here it is your activity 2. Identify 2 or 3 members of your family or people in your neighborhood who belong to the generation of your parents or grandparents. Discuss with them how material and non-material culture has changed over the years. How have they adapted to the changes? Write an essay about 1000 words and share it with other learners at the study center. Then understanding culture and human experience. Anthropology as a discipline has been concerned with an in-depth understanding of other cultures. It concentrated on the detailed study of local life in traditional societies and in exploring the life worlds of peoples in far-flung corners of the globe that were sources of immense curiosity to Western eyes. It is said that early anthropology was the handmaiden of the colonial enterprise of Western powers like England by providing detailed accounts of cultures and social organization of local people. Anthropologists assisted colonial governments in ruling subject populations. Despite the taint of this colonial association, it is through anthropological fieldwork that the tremendous variety of human experience has come into public view. Anthropologists explored societies and cultures in Africa, Oceania, Asia, and the America that were considered primitive or pre-modern by the developed West, through the idea of cultural relativism, asserted the uniqueness and relevance of every culture for its practitioners. Anthropologists study cultures through a process of immersion in the life and daily activities of the people being studied. This method is known as ethnography. Doing ethnography involves field work within the community. So what do you mean by ethnography? Doing ethnography involves field work within the community. So here it is the new term, ethnography. Doing ethnography involves field work within the community or studying the language. Participating in its activities, interacting with people, attempting to understand how they interpret and live in the world, and then making their understandings and worldviews known to those in one's own culture. Anthropologists would spend several years in the chosen field area and engage in participant observation that would facilitate their understanding of the native or local way of life. Contemporary anthropology does not focus upon the primitive culture but also the modern. Its key objective continues to be gaining an insight on phenomena from the point of view of the participants themselves. Ethnography in a nutshell attempts to study culture from the inside. Just as the work of anthropologists is to understand the way of life of different cultures, the work of literature is to understand the human situation. Louis Rogers and Ucluck 2014 point out that storytelling is one of the humankind's oldest methods of understanding and representing reality. Stories, plays, poems are considered the primary sources for narrating fundamental truths about human life and moral conflicts. They play a major role in shaping values and guiding human action. We have all grown up hearing stories about the values of truthfulness, that is, story of King Harishchandra, filial duty, the story of Shravan Kumar, wifely devotion, Savitri, and many other tales, fables, songs, and legends. The Indian epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, are considered the blueprints for an ideal life, performance of duty, and ideal society. Literature also provides us gateway into understanding social continuity and change. And the creative writer can do so in a way that the social scientist simply cannot match. The novels of Charles Dickens, for example, reflect the changing English society during the Industrial Revolution, portraying the poverty, inequality, and dehumanization that marked the lives of the new laboring classes. V.S. Naipaul's works bring to the life of migrant Indian community in the West Indies, negotiating race, class, and ethnic divisions and trying to keep alive the way of life of the motherland. The lasting legacy of colonialism on the colonized can be seen in the works of authors like Chinua Achebe, whose famous novels Things Fall Apart, first published in 1958, brings us face to face with the cultural conflicts and power struggles unleashed the Nigerian society. The sociologist Lewis Kosar writes, the creative imagination of the literary artist often has achieved insights into social process which have remained unexplored in social science. That is Kosar, 1972. 16 quoted in Lewis et al. 2014, page number 22. The anthropologist R.K. Jain, 2015, draws attention to the rich and insightful works of fiction in Hindi and other major and minor languages of India, which can serve as a storehouse of ethnographic information and which anthropologists can draw to better understand our heterogeneous society. His article discusses the genre of the Anchalika Upanyas or regional novel, which, much like an ethnographic test, narrates the linguistic and cultural ethos of a region. He discusses Rahi Mosam Raja's famous novel Adha Gaon 1966, which is set in a Shia Muslim community in a village in eastern Uttar Pradesh. The novel documents village life, collective identity, power struggles, and fractionalism, and the impact of sweeping political changes, including the partition of India, on the village and its people. The anthropologist Akhil Gupta, 2012, in his analysis of bureaucracy and corruption and poverty in India, draws upon Srilal Shuklal's famous satirical novel Rag Darbari. This novel, first published in 1968, was awarded the Sahitya Academy Award 1970 and is widely regarded as one of the richest works of fiction on local politics, corruption, and the grip of poverty on the lives of ordinary villagers. As Shukla was himself a government officer and served in and around Lucknow for several years, he brought in his years of first-hand observation into his fiction. The internationally acclaimed writer Amitav Ghosh is a trained anthropologist, and his works reveal a great attention to culture and context. For example, his work In an Antique Land is a fascinating combination of ethnography and narrative and has been acknowledged as a masterpiece. So here it is the main key point. According to your NET exam, you will get also question So according to culture and ethnicity, what is a great masterpiece? That is In an Antique Land, which is written by Amitav Ghosh, is an anthropologist. Is a fascinating combination of ethnography and narrative, published in 1993. In an Antique Land by Amitav Ghosh. Okay, In an Antique Land by Amitav Ghosh. Authors like Varati Mukherjee and Jhumpa Lahiri in the novels and short stories also bring out the tension between ways of life in the Indian immigrant experience in contemporary America. As students of comparative literature, it will become evident to you that the social and cultural transformations underway across the world reflect in the themes and preoccupations writers and artists that a study of literature also demands an appreciation of these processes. So select a novel or short story of your choice by an Indian author. How does the author understand and represent the culture of community he or she write an essay about 750 to 1000 words and share it with fellow learners. Then approaches to the study of the culture. Various theoretical approaches have been deployed in anthropology study culture. It will be helpful to briefly describe them in order to give you an understanding just how complex and slippery the concept of culture has become, particularly in the background of globalization and transnational flows of people, ideas and products. The following summary of these approaches is based upon Ember et al. 2007. All the early years of anthropology as a discipline, it was believed that all cultures developed or evolved in a similar way, from simple to complex, from primitive to civilized. The theory of evolutionism, as it is called, was based more on speculation than facts, and anthropologists discovered the great variety of human culture through fieldwork explorations in different corners of the world. Anthropologists shifted their focus from origins to actually understanding the way in which the various aspects of culture contributed to maintaining the social system. The approach was known as structural functionalism. The culture personality approach because focused upon the interrelationship between the development of the personality of the individual and the culture of the group, and was popularized in the United States by writers Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead. Okay, so here you can see the culture personality approach focused on interrelationship between the development of the personality and the individual. Okay, so here culture of the group was popularized in the United States by writers like Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead. A theory called structuralism emerged in anthropology in 1950s with Claude Lévi-Strauss as its best known proponent. From the 1960s, anthropologists began to experiment with different ways of studying and understanding culture. Alternative ways of studying and describing culture were attempted. These included the use of personal narrative, storytelling and poetry, giving voice to those being studied in more consciously participatory ways. The feminist movement, which had become prominent during that time, had a major influence on this new way of thinking about human experience and culture. Anthropology was also influenced by the genre of literary criticism, and the idea that culture is like a literary text that can be analyzed for meaning became popular. One of the major proponents of this kind of interpretive approach was the anthropologist Clifford Geertz. According to Geertz, the anthropologist ethnographer interprets those aspects of the culture under study that are of interest to him or her. He then conveys this interpretation to members of his or her own culture, thereby acting as a selective intercultural translator. For interpretive anthropologists, the goal is to understand what it means to be a person living in a particular culture. Understanding meaning can only be taken up through forms of literary analysis. These are necessarily personal and subjective. Thus, one anthropologist's understanding of a culture phenomenon may be quite different from another's. Yet neither is wrong or right in an objective sense. They both reflect differing worldviews of anthropologists as well as description of the culture. This understanding of the ethnographer's craft is a literary intuitive exercise in which anthropologist is like a novelist or a literary critic, led to many debates within the discipline. Geertz's book The Interpretation of Culture, published in 1973, is considered an anthropological classic. So, which book is considered an anthropological classic? You can get your net questions also. So, here it is the book of Geertz, that is Geertz's book, The Interpretation of Cultures. published in 1973, is considered an anthropological classic. Feminist and interpretive approaches gave importance to the subjective and contextual nature of knowledge. Postmodern approaches further developed the theme and attempted to show how discourse at the body of knowledge and practices generally believed to be true were shaped by structures of power and dominance. The work of French philosopher Michel Foucault (1926 to 1984) is particularly significant. Anthropologists who accept this view contend that the subjects studied by them are dehumanized and thus controlled and manipulated through the operation of the powerful apparatus of science. They argue of an activist anthropology that speaks for the dominated and disenfranchised rather than study them as objects. Thus, the study of culture is unavoidably political and must lay bare the dynamics of hierarchy, control, and hegemony that operate within a globalized world. Culture can no longer be conceptualized as a static, constant phenomenon, but rather as a dynamic, ever changing flow whose boundaries are permeable and indeed becoming harder and harder to define. The ever brief overview would have given you an idea about the fluidity of the concept of culture. Let us now attempt to understand cultural diversity, which is of crucial importance of your study and comparative literature. Read the previous section once more and chart out how the different approaches view culture. Who are the proponents of particular approaches? That is cultural diversity. So we will go cultural diversity. So what do you mean by cultural diversity? Cultural diversity implies two things. First, the existence of native cultures in every part of the world, as mentioned earlier. It has been the task of anthropologists to study them in detail. The other aspect of diversity is migrant and immigrant cultures across the globe. While humans have always migrated from one part of the world to the other, the improvements in the means of transport and communication and the integration of world economy through colonialism, capitalism, and globalization have resulted in unprecedented movements or migrations of peoples. Countries like the USA, Canada, and Britain have become nations of migrants and immigrants. North American culture is known partly as a melting pot and partly a mosaic of cultural diversity. That is Ember et al. 2007. The term diaspora is used to denote major dispersions of populations on account of variety of factors including war and persecution, human trafficking and slavery, economic opportunity and colonial compulsion. Okay, so what do you mean by diaspora? So here it is the word diaspora. The term diaspora is used to denote major dispersions of population on account of a variety of factors including war, persecution, human trafficking, slavery, economic opportunity and colonial compulsions. Indian diasporic communities in the West Indies, Malaysia, Fiji, etc. were recruited as plantation labor in the British colonies. These migrant groups retained elements of their native culture and assimilated with different degrees of success in the host societies. Following Erickson 2008, we note that in contemporary times the expansion in foreign travel has made transnational flows of people, ideas and relationships even more intense. Tourism and adventure, cultural experiences and medical treatment is flourishing. Migrants from economically less developed countries are seeking opportunities and settling in Europe, America, Australia, Canada, that bringing a taste of their culture with them. The vast number of Indian restaurants across the world, from fine dining places to humble takeaways, is a good example. At the same time, multiculturalism has raised issues of identity politics and assertion. For example, religious minority rights that can be seen in the controversies over wearing the hijab or the turban. Technology has played a major role in bringing people into closer contact through the satellite TV, cell phones, the internet and social networks, the development of virtual communities and expansion of information and choices. The global economy and transnational companies have also made the labor process fluid. An Indian telemarketer working through the night in Gurgaon or Noida talking in an American accent, does business with American customers in their hometowns. Issues concerning environment, climate change, diseases and epidemics, terrorism, arms trade, human trafficking, cybercrime, etc. are serious global problems which affect all humanity. There is a need for international cooperation to find solutions. As Erickson aptly puts it, this ever tighter interweaving of formerly relatively separate sociocultural environments can lead to a growing realization of the fact that we are all in same boat. The humanity divided as it is by class, culture, geography and opportunities is fundamentally one. In this turbulent, fast changing world, typical ways of life are fast being transformed. From family structures to food and fashion, change is taking place almost by the day. This has led to serious question about the reality and stability of culture. Is there such a thing as our culture at all? At the same time, cultural identity and assertion is an important issue, and oppressed groups have begun to speak up and demand recognition. Ethnic, religious and linguistic groups reach against globalization and imperialism, attempt to strongly preserve their cultural uniqueness. Against this backdrop, it becomes crucial for a student of literature to study and analyze literature or creative work in a holistic manner, situating it in its socio-political context and attempting to unpack the multiple layers within which it is embedded. In the final section of the unit, we shall briefly discuss how the interdisciplinary domain of culture studies contributes to an understanding of literature and culture. Cultural studies considers a taste not just in the form of written language but also films, photographs, fashion, hairstyles, cuisines, in other words, all the meaningful artifacts of culture. As in anthropology, a cultural studies researcher considers cultures to be not just traditional high culture of ruling social groups but also popular culture and everyday meanings and practices. Here it is the activity 5. Read and review any literary work by a contemporary author documenting the experience of migrant and immigrant communities. Some suggested authors are V.S. Naipaul, Bharati Mukherjee, Jhumpa Lahiri, Amitav Ghosh. Share your review with your fellow learners. Then the cultural studies approach. Cultural studies concerns itself with the meanings and practices of everyday life. It approaches the study and analysis of culture in an interdisciplinary manner. It studies how particular cultural practices in a society relate to a wider systems of power, class, caste, gender, ideology, ethnicity, national information, etc. It seeks to understand how meaning is constructed and transmitted against the backdrop of specific social, political, and economic forces operating in a society at a particular point of time in history. To give an example from contemporary India, the growth of mobile telephony raises several interesting questions about relations of power, dominance, and personal freedom. Why have some community elders decreed that girls should not use mobile phones? Has it contributed to greater freedom of association between the sexes? How is it impacting gender relations? Cultural studies sensitizes us to the fact that cultural artifacts and practices are bound up with complex socio-political realities and need to be studied in their totality. The term CS was first used in the UK in 1964 by Richard Hogarth when he founded the Brigham Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. Stuart Hall, Hogarth's successor at the center, has been one of the best known names associated with CS. His work from the 1960s onwards, along with office colleagues and students including Paul Willis, David Hebdes, Angela McRobbie, is well known. The 1970s Britain were a period of great economic and political turmoil. The strong working class movement in Britain was in a crisis as industries shut down and trade union membership declined. Despite the worsening of the condition, thousands of working class British people shifted their loyalties from the Labour Party to the Conservative Party. The rise of the Conservative Party's Margaret Thatcher, who became one of the Britain's most powerful prime ministers, was a puzzle to those who analyze society in terms of class interest. Why would workers vote for a party and a leader who was so clearly on the side of the capitalist and business classes? The scholars at the CCCS turned to the work of an Italian thinker of the interwar period, Antonio Gramsci to understand the situation. Gramsci tried to understand the rise of the fascism in Europe in 1930s. He modified classical Marxism, which only spoke in terms of economic and political control, and saw culture as a key dimension. Capitalism operates through the everyday culture of working people in order to control and regulate them. His theory of hegemony was picked up by CS and helped scholars to better understand the ways in which culture and power worked hand in hand. At the same time, it also opened up the idea of agency through which dominated groups contest, resist, and counter dominant cultural narratives. The British CS scholars wanted to lay bare the social power imbalances and the dominant ideology, and thus enable marginalized people to have a say in this world. CS and USA was not so polemical in its approach and was rooted in a more liberal and pragmatic tradition. CS has also taken roots in India and is considered by scholars across disciplines as a fruitful method to analyze cultural production and consumption. Select any popular television serial either in Hindi or regional language using some of the ideas of cultural studies that you have read above. Try to see how the ideas and values it promotes relate to the social and political process at work. Write a note about 500 words and share it with fellow learners. Then let us sum up. Literature and all art forms are cultural products that are created within a specific milieu and against the backdrop of a particular understanding of the world that is socially and culturally derived, even when it is critiqued or contested. The creation of a text is not an innocent process which is solely concerned with the creativity of an author. It is a social and political act as well as embodies certain relationship of power, domination, and control. How the text is received, who reads it, and how it is evaluated and judged, and how it travels depend upon prevailing socio-political realities and cultural climate. The issue of translation is also deeply connected with culture. Understanding the local context, the unique way of life, the historical experiences of process such as colonialism, imperialism, and globalization help to situate a text within a context and facilitate cultural comparison. In this unit, we have attempted to open up the concept of culture as a way of life of social groups which is responsible for imparting a distinct identity. We have noted that culture is both material and non-material, and that it performs an important role in social integration and fulfilling both individual and social needs. We examined some of the major approaches to the study of culture in anthropology which reflect the evolution of the concept. We noted that interpretative anthropology is a culture as a text to be interpreted rather than as an empirical reality to be objectively studied. We also examine some of the key ideas of cultural studies which attempts to locate cultural practices in their socio-political context and maps the relationship of power and control underlying the production and consumption of culture. Then culture is critical, multi-layered and evolving concept. So here it is the main key point you can note down. So culture is a critical, multi-layered and evolving concept. Then unit 10 question, briefly describe the evolution of the concept and culture in English language. Discuss culture as a way of life. Then write a note on cultural diversity in the contemporary world. Can culture be viewed as a stable concept anymore? What are your views? How do cultural studies contribute to our understanding of culture? Here it is the references and suggested readings, that is Chinua Achebe, Kosar, Amber Carroll, Erickson, Thomas, Hyland, Greech, Clifford, Amitav Ghosh, Gupta, Akhil, Herskovich, Melville, Jane, Ravindra K, Lewis David, Linton, Ralph, Taylor, Edward B, Williams, Raymond, Center of the Study of the Culture and Society. So here it is all about unit 1 of your block 2, which already I have discussed. The literature and culture, unit 1 block 2 already I have covered. So please like, share, subscribe, study with master notes, and in the next class we will discuss unit 2. So stay tuned to study with master notes, and please push the bell icon and subscribe this channel and share this channel to your friends. So thank you viewers.